Child never came home from school in 2001. 20 years later, school bus driver revealed, heartbreaking truth: a yellow backpack with a broken zipper sits abandoned on a school bus seat, the last physical trace of a vanished kid who never made it home. In September 2001, 7-year-old Emma Richardson boarded her school bus on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Maplewood, Oregon. By 3:30 p.m., she had disappeared without a trace. What the school bus driver finally confessed 20 years later will devastate you. This is the haunting story of Emma Richardson, a missing children case where the shocking truth revealed proves that some child disappearance mysteries hide in plain sight. The heartbreaking story you're about to hear shows how one family's tragedy became an unsolved case that haunted an entire community for 2 decades. 7-year-old Emma Marie Richardson was the kind of child who made everyone smile. In the small logging town of Maplewood, Oregon, population 4,200, Emma was known as the little girl who wore mismatched socks on purpose, gave flowers to elderly neighbors, and asked questions about everything. Her 3rd-grade teacher, Mrs. Patricia Donovan, described her as endlessly curious, kind beyond her years, and the type of student who made teaching worthwhile. Emma lived Hachi, 847 Maple Street, with her mother Sarah, a nurse at Maplewood General Hospital, her father Michael, who worked the morning shift at Cascade Lumber Mill, and her 11-year-old brother Jake. Their modest blue house sat on a quiet street where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on and neighbors knew each other's names. The Richardson family was unremarkable in the best possible way. They attended Sunday services at Maplewood Community Church. Sarah volunteered at the school library. Michael coached Little League. They were woven into the fabric of their community, which made what happened next even more incomprehensible. September 11, 2001 started before dawn in the Richardson household. Sarah's nursing shift started at 7 a.m., so the family had developed a precise morning routine. Michael left for the lumber mill at 5:30 a.m. Jake caught the middle school bus at 6:45 a.m. That left Sarah and Emma with 30 minutes together each morning, their special time. That Tuesday morning, Emma wore her favorite purple shirt with a glittery butterfly on it, jeans with flowers embroidered on the pockets, and of course mismatched socks, one pink with polka dots, one green with stripes. She had recently lost her 2 front teeth, and her gap-toothed smile beamed as Sarah braided her long brown hair. Sarah made Emma's standard lunch: peanut butter and jelly sandwich with the crusts cut off, apple slices, baby carrots, string cheese, and a juice box. She tucked a handwritten note into the lunchbox like she did every single day. "Love you to the moon and back. Have the best day, butterfly girl." Mom, at 7:42 a.m., Emma put on her yellow backpack, the one with the broken zipper that Sarah kept meaning to replace, kissed her mother goodbye, and walked out the front door. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Emma walked down their gravel driveway, turned left, and headed toward the corner of Maple Street and Oak Avenue. That was the designated bus stop for 6 neighborhood children. The spot was visible from 3 different houses. Parents took turns doing bus stop duty, making sure the younger kids got on safely. That morning, it was Karen Mitchell's turn, mother of 5-year-old twins who rode the same bus. Sarah Richardson never worried about that 2-minute walk. Maplewood was safe. Everyone knew everyone. Child abduction cases happen in big cities, on the news, to other families. Not here. Not to them. Sarah had no way of knowing that image. Emma's purple butterfly shirt and yellow backpack disappearing around the corner at 7:43 a.m. would be the last time she ever saw her daughter alive. At 7:42 a.m., Emma put on her yellow backpack, the one with the broken zipper that Sarah kept meaning to replace, kissed her mother goodbye, and walked out the front door. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Emma walked down their gravel driveway, turned left, and headed toward the corner of Maple Street and Oak Avenue. That was the designated bus stop for 6 neighborhood children. The spot was visible from 3 different houses. Parents took turns doing bus stop duty, making sure the younger kids got on safely. That morning, it was Karen Mitchell's turn, mother of 5-year-old twins who rode the same bus. Sarah Richardson never worried about that 2-minute walk. Maplewood was safe. Everyone knew everyone. Child abduction cases happened in big cities, on the news, to other families. Not here. Not to them. Sarah had no way of knowing that image. Emma S., purple butterfly shirt and yellow backpack, disappearing around the corner at 7:43 a.m. would be the last time she ever saw her daughter alive. Bus number 47 arrived at the Maple Street stop at 7:47 a.m. Exactly on schedule. The driver was 53-year-old Robert James Fletcher, a Maplewood native who had been driving school bus routes for 12 years. Fletcher was a familiar face in town, quiet, reliable, unremarkable. He lived alone in a small rental house on the edge of town, kept to himself mostly, but was always friendly with the kids and parents. He kept a jar of lollipops near his seat and handed them out for good behavior. According to Karen Mitchell's initial statement to police, Emma boarded bus number 47 that morning, along with the Mitchell twins and 3 other neighborhood children. Emma was wearing her purple butterfly shirt and yellow backpack. She smiled and waved at Mrs. Mitchell before climbing the 3 steps onto the bus. Karen watched until the bus door closed and the vehicle pulled away, heading toward its next stop. Everything seemed normal. Bus number 47 made 8 more stops throughout Maplewood's residential areas, picking up a total of 28 children ranging from kindergarten through 5th grade. At 8:19 a.m., the bus arrived at Maplewood Elementary School. According to school security camera footage reviewed later by investigators, 27 children exited the bus. Emma Richardson was not among them. At 3:15 p.m. that afternoon, bus number 47 completed its route, dropping children back at their designated stops. When the bus reached Maple Street at 3:32 p.m., Karen Mitchell was waiting with the twins. Emma did not exit the bus. Karen immediately approached driver Robert Fletcher and asked where Emma was. Fletcher seemed confused by the question. He told Karen that Emma must have gotten a ride home with her parents or stayed after school for an activity. Karen explained it wasn't possible Sir Richardson's car was in the driveway, and Emma wasn't enrolled in any after-school programs. Fletcher's face went pale. He radioed dispatch immediately. By 3:45 p.m., Sarah Richardson received a phone call from Maplewood Elementary's principal asking if Emma was homesick. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach. Emma had gotten on the bus that morning. Sarah had watched her walk to the stop. Karen Mitchell had watched her board. Where was her daughter? At 4:02 p.m., Sarah Richardson called 911 to report her child missing. By 4:15 p.m., Maplewood Police Department had officers at the school, at the Richardson home, and interviewing Robert Fletcher. By 4:30 p.m., the entire town knew that a child had vanished without a trace. The initial police response was swift but confused. How does a child disappear from a school bus in broad daylight? It seemed impossible. There had to be a simple explanation, a miscommunication, a friend's house, a misunderstanding. But as the hours ticked by, that hope evaporated. Detective Linda Vasquez, a 15-year veteran of the Maplewood PD, took lead on the case. She immediately ordered a search of the school grounds, the bus, and the route between Emma's home and the school. K-9 units were deployed. Officers went door to door in the neighborhood asking if anyone had seen Emma that day. The school provided attendance records. Emma Richardson had been marked absent by her 3rd grade teacher. She never made it to class. Bus driver Robert Fletcher was interviewed extensively that first evening. He seemed genuinely distraught and confused. Yes, he remembered Emma boarding at the Maple Street stop that morning. Yes, she took her usual seat 4th row back, window side. No, he didn't remember seeing her exit at the school, but with 28 kids getting off at once, he couldn't keep track of every single child every single moment. Fletcher voluntarily submitted to a police interview and a search of his home and vehicle. Nothing suspicious was found. He had no criminal record, no history of complaints, no red flags whatsoever. By 8 p.m. on September 11, 2001, the Richardson family's worst nightmare was unfolding. Their daughter had boarded a school bus and disappeared. The community of Maplewood was in shock. Parents held their own children tighter. The question on everyone's lips was the same. How does a vanished kid simply cease to exist between her front door and her classroom? Before I reveal what investigators discovered in those first critical 72 hours, let me ask you if Your child disappeared in the care of someone you trusted completely. Who would you blame? The answer might not be as obvious as you think. The search for Emma Richardson was just beginning, and what police uncovered in the investigation phase would lead them down paths darker than anyone in this small town could have imagined. In missing children cases, investigators operate under a brutal truth: the first 72 hours are everything. Statistics show that abducted children who are murdered are typically killed within the first 3 hours of their disappearance. Detective Linda Vasquez knew she was racing against a clock that had already been ticking for nearly 4 hours. By 9 p.m. on September 11th, the Maplewood Police Department had transformed into a command center for the missing child case. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team was en route from Portland. The Oregon State Police activated an Amber Alert, though the system was still relatively new in 2001, having been created just 5 years earlier. The immediate focus was on 3 investigative priorities: victimology, timeline reconstruction, and suspect identification. Emma Richardson's victimology painted a picture of a completely normal 7-year-old with no risk factors. She had no history of running away. She had never expressed fear of anyone. She had no online presence. Social media barely existed for children in 2001. She wasn't rebellious or troubled. She was a strata student who loved her family. There was absolutely nothing in Emma's background that suggested she would disappear voluntarily. Timeline reconstruction proved more challenging. Karen Mitchell confirmed Emma boarded bus number 47 at 7:47 a.m. School security footage showed bus number 47 arriving at 8:19 a.m. 27 children exited. Emma was not visible in any footage. That gave investigators a 32-minute window where Emma Richardson disappeared. But disappeared where and how? Detective Vasquez and her team conducted exhaustive interviews with every single child who rode bus number 47 that morning. The interviews revealed something troubling. Nobody specifically remembered seeing Emma on the bus during the ride to school. Several kids remembered her boarding at the Maple Street stop. But after that, nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. One child, 9-year-old Marcus Webb, who sat in the 5th row, told investigators something that made Vasquez's blood run cold. "I remember Emma got on, but I don't remember seeing her when we got to school. I thought maybe she was in the bathroom or something." The bathroom! Bus number 47 was a standard school bus, no bathroom. Marcus was confusing something. But what? Forensic teams processed bus number 47 with meticulous detail. They found Emma's fingerprints on the handrail near the entrance, confirming she had boarded. They found no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of violence. They did find Emma's yellow backpack stuffed partially under the driver's seat near the front of the bus. That discovery sent the investigation in a chilling new direction. Why would Emma's backpack be near the driver's seat when witnesses said she sat in the 4th row? Had she moved during the ride? Had someone moved the backpack? And most disturbing, if Emma had gotten off the bus somewhere between her home and the school, wouldn't she have taken her backpack with her? Robert Fletcher was re-interviewed immediately. He insisted he had no explanation for the backpack's location. He suggested maybe Emma had moved seats during the ride. Maybe she had gotten up to ask him a question and left her backpack. Maybe another student had kicked it forward. He seemed as baffled as the investigators, but Detective Vasquez's instincts were screaming. Something was wrong with Fletcher's story. By midnight on September 11th, search teams were combing the entire 23-minute route between Emma's neighborhood and Maplewood Elementary. They searched ditches, wooded areas, abandoned buildings, empty lots. They knocked on doors asking if anyone had seen a little girl in a purple butterfly shirt. They reviewed traffic camera footage from the 3 intersections along the route. Nothing. Emma Richardson had disappeared without a trace. Sarah Richardson spent that first night in a waking nightmare. She sat in Emma's bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and drawings, clutching the purple butterfly shirt Emma had worn just yesterday. Michael Richardson joined the search teams, unable to sit still, needing to do something. Jake, the 11-year-old brother, sat silently in shock, not understanding how his little sister could simply cease to exist. the Maplewood community mobilized with devastating speed. By the morning of September 12th, over 300 volunteers had organized search parties. Local businesses printed thousands of missing child posters featuring Emma's school photo, that gap-toothed smile, those bright eyes. The posters were plastered on every telephone pole, store window, and community bulletin board within a 50-mile radius. Missing: Emma Richardson, age 7, last seen September 11, 2001, became the most haunting words in Maplewood's history. As the investigation entered its second week, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit developed a profile of potential suspects. In child abduction cases, statistics are grimly consistent. 90% of abducted children are taken by someone they know. Family members account for 49%. Acquaintances account for 27%. Strangers account for only 24%. This meant investigators had to look at the most painful possibilities. First, Emma's own family. Michael Richardson was interviewed 6 times in the first 10 days. His alibi was solid. He had clocked in at Cascade Lumber Mill at 5:47 a.m. and remained there until 2:30 p.m. With dozens of witnesses. Security camera footage confirmed his presence. Phone records showed no suspicious calls. Financial records showed no unusual transactions. His computer revealed no concerning search history. Sarah Richardson was similarly scrutinized. Her nursing shift at Maplewood General Hospital was confirmed by time cards and coworkers. She had been in surgery assisting Dr. Robert Chune from 7:30 a.m. until 1 p.m. Her phone records, financial records, and personal history revealed nothing suspicious. Jake Richardson, despite being only 11 years old, was also investigated. His middle school attendance was confirmed. Teachers vouched for his presence throughout the day. His relationship with his sister had been typical sibling dynamics, occasional bickering, but generally protective and loving. The Richardson family's devastation was genuine. Their cooperation was complete. Their pain was unmistakable. Every investigator involved agreed the parents were not involved in Emma's disappearance. That left acquaintances and strangers. Robert Fletcher remained the most obvious person of interest. He had been alone with Emma. He had access. He had opportunity. But motive? Fletcher had no criminal history, no reports of inappropriate behavior with children, no concerning online activity. Investigators seized his computer and found nothing but basic emails and news websites. His rental house revealed a lonely but unremarkable life. TV dinners in the freezer, books about World War II history, a photo album with pictures of his late wife who had died of cancer 3 years earlier. Neighbors described Fletcher as quiet, polite, and sad since his wife died. Not one person had a bad word to say about him. Not one red flag emerged. Detective Vasquez was frustrated. Her gut told her Fletcher knew something, but she couldn't prove it. Polygraph tests in 2001 were less reliable than modern techniques, but Fletcher agreed to take one anyway. The results were inconclusive. But stress could mean guilt or could simply mean the pressure of being a suspect in a child's disappearance. Investigators also looked at every registered sex offender within a 100-mile radius of Maplewood. In 2001, Oregon's sex offender registry contained 412 names. Each was interviewed, each was investigated. Alibis were verified, none connected to Emma Richardson. The investigation expanded to Emma's school. Teachers, janitors, cafeteria workers, parent volunteers, everyone was interviewed. Had anyone shown unusual interest in Emma? Had she mentioned any adult who made her uncomfortable? Had there been any concerning incidents? Nothing. Emma had been a normal, happy child in a normal, safe school environment. By October 2001, the case began to grow cold. Despite thousands of tips called into the hotline, despite hundreds of interviews, despite exhaustive searches, investigators had no solid leads. Emma Richardson had simply vanished. The media attention, which had been intense in those first weeks, began to fade. National news moved on to other tragedies. After the September 11th terrorist attacks that occurred the same day Emma disappeared, local news continued coverage, but the desperate updates became less frequent. The Richardson family clung to hope. Sarah quit her nursing job to devote full time to finding her daughter. Michael took a leave of absence from the lumber mill. They appeared on local news programs, begging for information. They met with psychics, faith healers, anyone who claimed they could help. They organized annual vigils on the anniversary of Emma's disappearance. But as the months turned into years, even the most optimistic supporters began to whisper the unthinkable. Emma Richardson was probably dead, and whoever took her had gotten away with it. Detective Vasquez never closed the case file, but it was moved to the cold case division. New leads had stopped coming in. The trail had gone completely dead. By 2005, most of Maplewood had moved on. The missing child posters faded and were taken down. The yellow ribbons tied around trees disintegrated. Life continued, as it always does, even in the shadow of tragedy. But Sarah and Michael Richardson never moved on. They kept Emma's bedroom exactly as she had left it that morning in September 2001. They celebrated her birthday every year with a cake and candles. They aged progressed her photo, imagining what she might look like at 10, at 13, at 16. They refused to give up hope, even as that hope became harder and harder to maintain. What nobody knew not? Detective Vasquez, not the FBI, not the devastated Richardson family, was that the shocking truth revealed years later would come from the last person anyone suspected. And it would prove that sometimes the most haunting stories of missing children hold secrets that are more heartbreaking than sinister. Stay with me, because the clue that would eventually break this case wide open was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Before I reveal what happened next, think about this. What if Emma Richardson's disappearance wasn't an abduction at all? What if it was something even more tragic? 14 years after Emma Richardson disappeared without a trace, a routine traffic stop in a small town 300 miles away would set in motion a chain of events that would finally reveal the truth. In March 2015, a police officer in Bend, Oregon pulled over a vehicle for a broken taillight. The driver was a 67-year-old man named Robert James Fletcher. During the traffic stop, Fletcher became emotional and agitated. The officer, sensing something was wrong, asked if he was okay. Fletcher broke down crying and said words that would reopen the cold case. "I need to talk to someone about Emma Richardson." The officer had no idea who Emma Richardson was, but when he called it in, the name triggered alerts across Oregon's law enforcement database. Within an hour, Detective Linda Vasquez, now retired but still haunted by the unsolved case, received a phone call that made her hands shake. Robert Fletcher wanted to confess, but what he had to say would shatter everything investigators thought they knew about this child disappearance. On March 17, 2015, in an interview room at the Bend Police Department, 67-year-old Robert Fletcher sat across from Detective Linda Vasquez and FBI Special Agent Thomas Moreno. Fletcher looked 20 years older than his age. His hands trembled, his voice cracked, and over the next 4 hours, he told a story that would devastate everyone who had spent 14 years searching for answers about the vanished kid named Emma Richardson. Detective Vasquez started with the essential question. "Mr. Fletcher, what happened to Emma Richardson on September 11, 2001? Fletcher took a deep breath, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She never got off my bus," he said, "but not for the reason you think." This is where the heartbreaking story takes a turn that nobody, not the FBI, not the investigators, not Emma's family ever anticipated. Fletcher explained that on the morning of September 11, 2001, Emma Richardson did board bus number 47 at 7:47 a.m., just as witnesses confirmed. She did take her usual seat in the 4th row, but about 10 minutes into the 23-minute route to Maplewood Elementary, Fletcher noticed something in his rearview mirror that made his blood run cold. Emma had slumped over in her seat. She wasn't moving. Fletcher immediately pulled the bus over to the side of the road. This was on a rural stretch of Highway 22, about halfway to the school, in an area with no houses or businesses nearby. He rushed back to Emma's seat and found her unconscious, not breathing, with new palsy. 7-year-old Emma Richardson had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. Fletcher, panicking, attempted CPR. He had basic first aid training from his bus driver certification, but he wasn't a medical professional. He pumped her chest. He tried rescue breathing. The other children on the bus were screaming, crying, asking what was wrong with Emma. Fletcher made a decision in that moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of immediately calling 911, he continued trying to revive her, believing he could save her. He spent nearly 15 minutes attempting CPR. By the time he accepted that Emma was gone, he was in a complete state of panic, and that's when he made the choice that would destroy any chance of justice, closure, or understanding. Robert Fletcher hid Emma Richardson's body. Fletcher's confession continued, each word more devastating than the last. He explained that in his panicked state, he convinced himself that no one would believe Emma's death was natural. He had been alone with her. She had died in his care. He thought he would be blamed, arrested, destroyed. His late wife had died just 3 years earlier, leaving him alone and depressed. He couldn't face losing everything else, so he made a choice that transformed a tragic medical emergency into a criminal cover-up. Fletcher placed Emma's body in a maintenance access panel at the rear of the bus's space used for storing emergency equipment. He covered her with a tarp. He told the children on the bus that Emma had gotten sick and he had let her off to be picked up by her parents. The children, ranging in age from 5 to 11, were confused and scared, but they believed the adults in charge. Fletcher drove the rest of the route in a daze, picked up the remaining students, and arrived at Maplewood Elementary at 8:19 a.m. 27 children exited the bus. Emma Richardson's body remained hidden in the maintenance panel. Fletcher went through the motions of his day in a state of shock. He drove his afternoon route. He parked the bus in the district lot at 4:30 p.m., and that night, under cover of darkness, he returned to the lot with his personal vehicle. He removed Emma's body from the bus, and he buried her in a remote location in the Cascade Mountains, about 40 miles from Maplewood. For 14 years, Robert Fletcher carried this secret. He continued driving school buses for 3 more years before the guilt became unbearable, and he retired early in 2004. He moved away from Maplewood, trying to escape the memory. He isolated himself from everyone. He contemplated suicide multiple times, and in March 2015, during that routine traffic stop in Bend, Oregon, the weight of his secret finally crushed him. He couldn't carry it anymore. Detective Vasquez sat in stunned silence as Fletcher's confession concluded. This wasn't the child abduction case she had investigated. This wasn't a predator who had kidnapped Emma. This was a medical emergency that had spiraled into a cover-up because of one man's panic and terrible judgment. The question Vasquez needed answered immediately was, where is Emma's body? On March 18, 2015, Robert Fletcher led investigators to a remote area in the Cascade National Forest, approximately 40 miles northeast of Maplewood. The location was accessible only by a rough logging road that required a 4-wheel drive vehicle. It was the kind of place where no one ever went: dense forests, steep terrain, far from any hiking trails. Fletcher had chosen this location specifically because of its isolation. He had been there before. It was a spot where he and his late wife had once gone camping in the 1980s. It held meaning for him, which is why he remembered it in his panicked state. Search teams, including K-9 units specially trained in cadaver detection, began the grim task of locating Emma Richardson's remains. The forest had changed in 14 years. Trees had grown, underbrush had spread. Fletcher couldn't remember the exact spot with precision. It took 2 days of searching, but on March 20, 2015, the K-9 unit alerted to a location beneath a large Douglas fir tree. Forensic anthropologists carefully excavated the site, and they found her. Emma Richardson's remains were badly decomposed after 14 years, but forensic analysis confirmed the identity through dental records. She was still wearing remnants of her purple butterfly shirt. Her yellow backpack. No, wait. The yellow backpack had been found on the bus. Her body was buried with only her clothes. The forensic autopsy provided the final, heartbreaking piece of the puzzle. Emma Richardson had died of sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, a rare cardiac condition that causes sudden death in otherwise healthy children. It's a genetic disorder that often goes undetected until it's too late. Emma had no prior symptoms. No warning signs, no diagnosis. She had died instantly, painlessly, on a school bus on the morning of September 11, 2001. And instead of her family receiving closure and being able to grieve properly, Robert Fletcher's panicked cover-up had stolen 14 years of their lives. Robert Fletcher was arrested and charged with multiple felonies: concealing a death, abuse of a corpse, obstruction of justice, and filing false police reports. The district attorney considered charging him with manslaughter, arguing that his failure to immediately call 911 may have costs Emma a chance at survival, though medical experts testified that, given the severity of her cardiac arrest, even immediate medical intervention likely wouldn't have saved her. The legal case against Fletcher was complicated by the passage of time and the unique circumstances. Fletcher's defense attorney argued that his client had acted in a state of panic, not with criminal intent. He had not killed Emma. He had not abused her. He had made a terrible decision in a moment of crisis, and he had lived with crushing guilt for 14 years before finally coming forward. The prosecution argued that Fletcher's cover-up had robbed the Richardson family of closure, prevented a proper investigation, and destroyed any chance of understanding what had happened to Emma. His actions had caused immeasurable suffering to a family, a community, and law enforcement officers who spent years searching for a child who was already dead. In December 2015, after months of legal proceedings, Robert Fletcher pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence recommendation of 15 years in prison. The judge, considering Fletcher's age, his lack of prior criminal history, and his eventual confession, sentenced him to 12 years. But for the Richardson family, no sentence could ever be enough, and no sentence could give them back the 14 years they spent not knowing if their daughter was alive, dead, suffering, or safe. The question that haunted everyone was, what if Fletcher had simply called 911 that morning? What if he had been honest from the beginning? Emma would still be dead, her cardiac condition ensured that, but her family could have grieved, could have buried her, could have moved forward with their lives. Instead, Fletcher's cowardice had created a missing children case that never needed to exist. Before I reveal how the Richardson family responded to this shocking truth revealed after 14 years of anguish, let me ask you, can you imagine spending 14 years hoping your child is still alive only to discover she died in the first hour she was missing? The emotional devastation the family would face was only just beginning. When Detective Linda Vasquez arrived at the Richardson home on March 20, 2015, to deliver the news that Emma's remains had been found, Sarah Richardson knew immediately from the detective's face that her 14-year vigil of hope was over. Sarah collapsed to her knees in her doorway. Micaiah Richardson, who had been folding Emma's clothes she would never wear, clothes they kept washing and maintaining out of superstitious hope, heard his wife's wail and came running. Detective Vasquez had to deliver the most devastating news imaginable. Your daughter died 14 years ago. Within minutes of leaving your home, and the person you trusted to keep her safe hid her death instead of reporting it. The Richardson family's grief was unlike anything counselors had encountered. In typical death cases, families progress through stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, but the Richardsons had been frozen in limbo for 14 years, unable to grieve because they didn't know if Emma was dead or alive. They had maintained hope even as that hope grew more painful with each passing year. Now they had to grieve twice, once for the death of their daughter 14 years ago, and once for the death of the hope that had sustained them. Sarah Richardson's first question was the question that would haunt her forever. Did she suffer? The medical examiner's report provided small comfort. Sudden Arrhythmic Death Syndrome causes instantaneous cardiac arrest. Emma would have felt a brief moment of dizziness, then lost consciousness within seconds. She would not have experienced pain. She would not have been afraid. She simply ceased to exist in an instant. But that knowledge couldn't ease the anguish of knowing Emma had died alone. On a bus, with only a panicked stranger attempting to save her, she hadn't died in her mother's arms. She hadn't been comforted. She hadn't heard "I love you" one last time. Michael Richardson's reaction was fury, pure, consuming rage at Robert Fletcher for stealing 14 years from their family. Emma could have been buried in 2001. They could have said goodbye. They could have grieved and eventually healed. Instead, Fletcher's cowardice had condemned them to 14 years of torture. Wondering if their daughter was being held captive somewhere, suffering, calling for them, Jake Richardson, now 25 years old, had spent half his life with his sister missing. He had grown from an 11-year-old boy to a man in the shadow of her disappearance. He had struggled with survivors, guilt, depression, and PTSD. His adolescence had been defined by his sister's absence, and now he had to process that she had been dead the entire time, that every birthday, every anniversary, every moment of hope had been based on a lie. The Richardson family requested a private viewing of Emma's remains before the burial. Forensic anthropologists had carefully preserved what they could. Sarah Richardson held her daughter's skull and wept, pressing it to her chest, whispering apologies for not protecting her, for not knowing, for failing to bring her home sooner. The town of Maplewood, Oregon, was shattered by the revelation. For 14 years, this community had lived with the horror of an unsolved child disappearance. They had maintained Emma's memory with annual visits. They had implemented new child safety protocols in schools. They had organized search parties every spring. They had worn yellow ribbons and displayed missing child posters, and now they learned that their missing child had died on day one. And the person they had trusted, a bus driver they all knew, a neighbor, a fellow community member, had lied to them for 14 years. The betrayal ran deep. How many times had community members spoken to Robert Fletcher in those weeks and months after Emma's disappearance? How many times had he accepted their sympathy, their support, their trust? How many times had he looked Sarah Richardson in the eye at community vigils, knowing what he had done? Former Maplewood Elementary students who had been on bus number 47 that day came forward with their own trauma. Many had spent 14 years with fragmented memories of that morning, confused about what they had seen or not seen. Some had been questioned repeatedly by investigators as children, made to feel like they should have noticed something, should have saved Emma somehow. Now they learned that Fletcher had lied to them, had manipulated them, had used their innocence against them. Many needed therapy to process the betrayal and the realization that they had witnessed Emma's death without knowing it. Karen Mitchell, who had been on bus stop duty that morning, was devastated. She had watched Emma board that bus. She had trusted Robert Fletcher. She had spent 14 years wondering if she should have noticed something, should have done something differently. The guilt had nearly destroyed her marriage. And now she learned there was nothing she could have done. Emma's death was a medical tragedy, not a preventable abduction. Maplewood Elementary School held a memorial service where over 500 people gathered. The principal, who had been just a third-grade teacher in 2001, spoke about the loss of innocence the community had experienced. They had learned that tragic things could happen even in safe places. They had learned that trust could be misplaced. They had learned that even ordinary people are capable of extraordinary betrayals. The school planted a memorial garden in Emma's honor with purple flowers and butterfly-shaped garden stones. A bench was installed with a plaque reading, Emma Richardson, 1994 a 2001, Forever 7, Forever Loved. But the memorial couldn't erase the anger many felt toward Robert Fletcher. Some community members advocated for the maximum sentence. Others, surprisingly, expressed a degree of understanding, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that Fletcher's panic had led to a catastrophic decision that he clearly regretted. The debate divided Maplewood. Was Fletcher a coward who deserved no mercy, or was he a broken man who made a terrible mistake in a moment of crisis? The community struggled to reconcile these questions, and many relationships were damaged in the process. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the Richardson family's ordeal was having to reframe 14 years of memories in light of the truth. Every anniversary they had marked, every birthday they had celebrated for Emma, every moment of hope of it had been based on the false premise that Emma might still be alive. Sarah Richardson spoke publicly about this in a victim impact statement delivered at Fletcher's sentencing hearing. Her words devastated everyone in the courtroom. For 14 years, I set the table for 4 people, even though only 3 of us were home. I kept Emma's seat empty because I believed she would come back to fill it. I bought her birthday presents and wrapped them and put them in her room, imagining the day she would finally get to open them. I aged her photographs, wondering if she'd have my nose or her father's eyes as she grew older. I searched for her face in every crowd, every parking lot, every school playground I passed. I held on to hope, because hope was all I had. And Robert Fletcher knew every single day for 14 years that my hope was a lie. He watched me suffer. He watched our family disintegrate. He watched our community tear itself apart, searching for a child he knew was dead. And he said nothing. Emma died in seconds from a condition no one could have prevented. That's a tragedy. But what Robert Fletcher did, that's not a tragedy. That's a choice. He chose his own comfort over our closure. He chose his own fear over our right to grieve. He chose himself over Emma's memory. I will never forgive him. Not because he couldn't save my daughter, I understand he couldn't, but because he stole 14 years of our lives when we should have been allowed to mourn, to heal, and to move forward. Those years are gone forever, just like Emma. Michael Richardson's victim impact statement was shorter, but equally powerful. My son Jake was 11 when his sister disappeared. He's 25 now. 14 years of his life were defined by her absence. He had nightmares about her being held captive somewhere, calling for us. He developed anxiety, depression, and PTSD. He dropped out of college because he couldn't focus. He hasn't had a serious relationship because he couldn't trust anyone after what this did to our family. Robert Fletcher didn't just hide my daughter's body. He poisoned my son's entire adolescence with a lie. He stole Jake's chance at a normal childhood, a normal teenage experience, a normal young adulthood. And for what? To save himself from embarrassment. To avoid responsibility. It's unforgivable. Jake Richardson also addressed the court. His statement focused on a particular aspect of the trauma. Every September 11th, for 14 years, the world remembered the terrorist attacks. And I remembered that as the day my sister disappeared. I watched footage of people jumping from the Twin Towers, and I wondered if my sister was suffering somewhere worse. I watched families get closure as victims were identified, and I had nothing. Now I know she died that same day. In some horrible way, she's connected to that national tragedy forever. But unlike those families who could grieve and eventually heal, we were trapped in limbo because of one man's cowardice. I'll never get those 14 years back. I'll never know who I could have been if I'd even allowed to grieve my sister properly in 2001, instead of living in false hope until 2015. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. Even Robert Fletcher, sitting at the defense table, wept openly. The judge acknowledged the family's pain, but also noted the complexity of the case. Fletcher had not killed Emma. He had not abused her. He had made a catastrophic decision in a moment of panic and had carried unbearable guilt for 14 years before finally confessing. The judge sentenced Fletcher to 12 years in prison, noting that, while the sentence couldn't undo the harm, it served both punishment and acknowledgement of the devastation his actions had caused. As Fletcher was led out of the courtroom, he turned to face the Richardson family. Sarah Richardson met his eyes. Fletcher mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Sarah turned away without responding. Some apologies are simply too late to matter. If you're finding this heartbreaking story as devastating as I am, please hit that like button and subscribe to Missing Innocence for more true crime stories about missing children cases and unsolved mysteries that were finally solved. The emotional impact of this case doesn't end here. Stay with me, because what the Richardson family did next will show you the power of turning tragedy into purpose. 3 months after Robert Fletcher's sentencing, Sarah Richardson made a decision that would change the landscape of missing children investigations across the entire state of Oregon. She had spent 14 years as a victim, trapped in the anguish of not knowing. Now she knew the truth, and that truth was somehow more painful than the uncertainty. But Sarah Richardson refused to let her daughter's death be meaningless. She refused to let 14 years of suffering amount to nothing. In April 2016, Sarah Richardson stood on the steps of the Oregon State Capitol in Salem, surrounded by other families of missing children, law enforcement officials, and child advocacy groups. She was there to propose legislation that would be named after her daughter. Emma's law would mandate immediate reporting protocols for any child death or disappearance involving school personnel, and it would change everything about how school districts, transportation departments, and law enforcement handle child safety. But the fight to pass this law would reveal just how broken the system really was, and how many other children have been failed in similar ways. Sarah Richardson's advocacy work began with a simple but devastating question. How many other Robert Fletchers are out there? How many other school bus drivers, teachers, coaches, or school staff members have panicked in emergencies and made terrible decisions that cost children their lives or robbed families of closure? Her research uncovered a disturbing pattern. In Oregon alone, between 1995 and 2015, there had been 17 cases where school personnel had failed to immediately report child injuries, deaths, or disappearances. Most were not criminal cover-ups, like Fletcher's case, but rather failures of protocol. A child injured on a playground, but not taken to a hospital quickly enough. A child with medical emergency symptoms, dismissed as just tired. A child missing from a school trip for hours before parents were notified. The common thread: no mandatory reporting requirements with criminal penalties for violations. School districts had policies, but they were treated as guidelines rather than laws. And when violations occurred, the consequences were typically administrative or reprimand, maybe termination but not criminal. Emma's law proposed changing that. The legislation included several key provisions. 1. Mandatory immediate reporting. Any school employee who witnesses a child become unconscious, unresponsive, or goes missing must immediately call 911 and notify parents within 15 minutes. Failure to do so would be a felony. 2. Emergency medical training. All school bus drivers and personnel in charge of transporting children must complete advanced first aid and CPR certification, with annual recertification requirements. 3. Accountability measures. Schools must maintain real-time tracking of all children on school transportation, with automated parent notifications for boarding and arrival. 4. Criminal penalties. Anyone who conceals a child death or disappearance while acting in a professional capacity with children faces mandatory minimum sentencing. 5. Cold case review. Establishment of a state task force to review all unsolved missing children cases from the previous 20 years to determine if any involved similar cover-ups or reporting failures. The proposal faced immediate opposition. School districts argued it would create impossible liability burdens. Transportation unions worried about criminalizing split-second decisions made during emergencies. Insurance companies predicted skyrocketing premiums. Conservative legislators balked at the cost of implementing new tracking systems and training requirements. But Sarah Richardson was relentless. She testified before legislative committees. She organized rallies. She shared Emma's story on national news programs. She connected with other families who had lost children due to reporting failures, and she made one thing absolutely clear. Her daughter's death might have been unavoidable, but the 14 years of suffering that followed were entirely preventable. The fight to pass Emma's law exposed uncomfortable truths about child safety priorities. During legislative hearings, Sarah Richardson faced opposition from unexpected sources. A representative from the Oregon School Boards Association testified that while Emma's case was tragic, creating new criminal liability for school employees would lead to defensive decision-making that could actually harm children. If a bus driver is worried about going to prison for making a wrong call, they might hesitate in genuine emergencies, the representative argued. Sarah's response was devastating. Robert Fletcher didn't hesitate because he was worried about liability. He hesitated because he was worried about himself. Emma's law doesn't punish people for making difficult medical decisions. It punishes people for lying, for covering up, and for putting their own interests above a child's life and a family's right to know. If that's controversial, then we have a serious problem. The turning point came when Detective Linda Vasquez testified in support of the legislation. Now, retired Vasquez had spent her final years reviewing cold case files. Her testimony revealed something shocking. During her career, she had encountered at least 6 cases where delayed reporting by school personnel had compromised missing children investigations. In one case, Vasquez explained, a 9-year-old didn't get off the bus at his stop. The driver assumed the child had been picked up early and didn't report it for 3 hours. Those 3 hours were critical. The child had actually gotten off at the wrong stop and wandered into a wooded area. He was found hypothermic but alive. If the driver had reported immediately, that child wouldn't have suffered. Emma's law would prevent these delays. Medical experts testified about the golden hour in emergency medicine, the critical first 60 minutes after medical emergency when intervention is most effective. Dr. Robert Shun, the surgeon who had worked with Sarah Richardson at Maplewood General Hospital in 2001, provided emotional testimony. If Robert Fletcher had called 911 immediately when Emma collapsed, could we have saved her? Probably not. Sudden arrhythmic death syndrome is devastating and often fatal even with immediate intervention. But we'll never know because he didn't give Emma that chance. He didn't give medical professionals the opportunity to try. Emma's law ensures that every child gets that chance, every time, without exception. The advocacy of child safety organizations proved crucial. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children endorsed Emma's law. The Polyclass Foundation, named after the 12-year-old California girl who was abducted and murdered in 1993, threw their support behind it. Mothers Against Drunk Driving (MADD), though focused on a different issue, recognized the principle of accountability and added their voice. Perhaps most powerful were the testimonies of other families. Karen Wallace, whose 80-year-old son had died from an asthma attack on a school bus in 2008 after the driver delayed calling 911 for 20 minutes, testified, the driver said he thought my son was just having a panic attack. By the time paramedics arrived, my son had been without oxygen for too long. He suffered brain damage and died 3 days later. If Emma's law had existed then, my son might still be alive. These stories accumulated. The pattern became undeniable. The opposition began to crumble. On September 11, 2016, 15 years to the day after Emma Richardson disappeared, the Oregon State Legislature passed Emma's law with bipartisan support. The final vote was 52-8 in the House and 273 in the Senate. Governor Kate Brown signed it into law in a ceremony at the state capitol with Sarah and Michael Richardson standing beside her. Sarah Richardson's speech at the signing ceremony captured the emotional complexity of the victory. I don't get my daughter back. No law can do that. The 15 years Emma has been gone are gone forever. But maybe, just maybe, some other family won't have to experience what we did. Maybe some other child will get immediate medical attention that saves their life. Maybe some other family won't spend years in agonizing limbo, not knowing if their child is alive or dead. Emma died because of a rare medical condition no one could have prevented. But our suffering was extended for 14 years because one person chose his own interests over doing the right thing. Emma's law says clearly, when you accept responsibility for caring for children, you accept the responsibility to put their well-being above everything else, including your own fear, your own reputation, and your own comfort. This law is named after my daughter, but it's for every child in Oregon. It is for every family who sends their kids to school and trusts that the adults in charge will protect them. And it is a warning to anyone who would prioritize themselves over a child's safety. There will be consequences. The practical impact of Emma's law was immediate and significant. School districts across Oregon implemented new protocols. Bus companies installed GPS tracking and automated notification systems. Training requirements were updated. And within the first year, there were 3 documented cases where immediate reporting mandated by MLS law directly contributed to saving children's lives during medical emergencies. One case involved a 10-year-old who had a seizure on a school bus. The driver, trained under Emma's law requirements, immediately called 911 and performed the correct emergency response procedures. The child survived and made a full recovery. The child's mother wrote to Sarah Richardson, "Emma's law saved my daughter's life. Thank you for turning your tragedy into something that protects other children." But Emma's law could unaddress the deeper question that haunted the Richardson family. What do you do with the rest of your life after such devastating loss? How do you find meaning in the aftermath of tragedy? How do you move forward when the person you've been fighting for is gone? The Richardson family's journey toward healing would prove that sometimes the hardest part is the loss itself. It is learning to live with the person-shaped hole it leaves behind. Comment below if you think Emma's law should be implemented nationwide. Share this video to spread awareness about the importance of immediate reporting in child safety cases. And subscribe to Missing Innocence for more true crime stories about missing children that changed laws and saved lives. In the years following Robert Fletcher's conviction and the passage of Emma's law, the Richardson family faced the difficult work of rebuilding their lives. Grief counseling, which they had attempted during Emma's disappearance, took on new meaning now that they had closure. They could finally grieve properly, but that grief was complicated by 14 years of false hope and misdirected anger. Sarah Richardson eventually returned to nursing, but in a different capacity. She became a child life specialist at a pediatric hospital in Portland, working with families facing medical crises involving their children. "I can't change what happened to Emma," she explained in a 2018 interview, "but I can be present for other parents in their darkest moments. I can offer them the compassion and honesty I wish someone had shown me." Michael Richardson struggled more. He never returned to Cascade Lumber Mill. The thought of going back to the job he had been doing the morning Emma died was unbearable. He eventually found work as a counselor for families of missing children, using his experience to help others navigate the impossible terrain of uncertainty. "I know what it's like to not know," he told families he worked with. "I know how that uncertainty destroys you, and I can help you find ways to survive it." Jake Richardson, now in his late 20s, pursued a degree in criminal justice with a focus on cold case investigation. His sister's disappearance had defined his life, and he chose to transform that trauma into purpose. He joined the Oregon State Police in 2019 and specifically requested assignment to the Missing Persons Unit. Emma's case had a resolution, he said during his academy graduation speech, but there are thousands of missing children cases that don't. "I want to be the person who brings those families the answers they deserve," the Richardson family maintains. Emma's memory in quiet, personal ways. They visit her gravesite where she was finally properly buried in June 2015, her birthday and on the anniversary of her death. They keep a memory box with her belongings, the mismatched socks she loved, drawings from her third-grade class, the lunchbox with Sarah's final notes still inside. They celebrate her life rather than mourning only her death. In 2019, the Richardson family established the Emma Richardson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of missing children and advocating for child safety legislation. The foundation provides financial assistance for families searching for missing children, funds training for school personnel in emergency response, and supports research into sudden cardiac conditions in children. Robert Fletcher is currently serving his 12-year sentence at Oregon State Penitentiary. He will be eligible for parole in 2023, though most observers believe parole is unlikely given the nature of his crime and the public attention to the case. Fletcher has given only one interview from prison, published in 2018. In it, he expressed remorse but also tried to explain his mindset. "I'm not asking for forgiveness because I do undeserve it. I made a choice that destroyed a family and a community, but I want people to understand that it wasn't malicious. It was panic, pure panic. I saw that little girl dead and I couldn't process it. My wife had just died. I was barely holding myself together, and in that moment, I made the worst decision of my life." He continued, "People ask me how I lived with the secret for 14 years. The truth is, I didn't live. I existed. Every day was torture. Every time I saw a missing child poster with Emma's face, I wanted to die. Every time I saw her mother on the news begging for information, I hated myself more. The guilt was a prison worse than this one. When I finally confessed, it was because I couldn't carry it anymore. I needed the truth to come out, even if it destroyed me." Fletcher has reportedly become deeply religious in prison and spends much of his time writing letters of apology to the Richardson family. They have never responded and have stated publicly that they never will. Emma Richardson's case offers several critical lessons about missing children cases, emergency response protocols, and the rippling consequences of individual choices. 1. Sudden Arrhythmic Death Syndrome. Awareness. Since Emma's case gained national attention, awareness of SADs has increased significantly. Pediatric cardiologists now recommend that all children receive EKG screenings to detect potential cardiac abnormalities. Several states have implemented mandatory cardiac screening programs in schools. These programs have saved lives by identifying at-risk children before tragedy strikes. 2. School emergency protocols. Emma's law has become a model for similar legislation in 7 other states. The National School Boards Association, which initially opposed the legislation, now includes Emma's law principles in their recommended best practices for school emergency response. 3. The cost of cover-ups. Fletcher's case demonstrates that cover-ups almost always cause more harm than the original incident. If Fletcher had immediately called 911 when Emma collapsed, he would have faced no criminal liability or death was from natural causes beyond his control. His panicked decision to hide her death transformed a tragedy into a crime and multiplied the suffering of everyone involved. 4. The importance of immediate reporting. Time is critical in child disappearance cases. The first few hours determine whether a missing child is found alive. Any delay in reporting, whether due to confusion, fear, or deliberate concealment, dramatically reduces the chances of a positive outcome. 5. Community support for affected families. The Maplewood community's response to Emma's disappearance showed both the best and worst of human nature. The massive volunteer search efforts and sustained support demonstrated communal love and solidarity. But the eventual revelation also showed how communities can become re-traumatized when trusted members betray that trust. Final message. Emma Richardson's story is a heartbreaking reminder that missing children cases often hold secrets more complex than simple good versus evil narratives. Sometimes, the vanished kids at the center of these mysteries are victims, not of predators, but of medical tragedies compounded by human weakness. The shocking truth revealed in Emma's case that she died instantly from an undiagnosed heart condition and was hidden by a panicked bus driver offers no comfort, but it offers something perhaps more valuable, lessons that have already saved other children's lives through improved protocols, better training, and laws that prioritize immediate reporting above all else. If Emma's story has impacted you, please share this video to spread awareness about sudden arrhythmic death syndrome and the importance of immediate emergency reporting. Subscribe to Missing Innocence for more true crime stories about child disappearance cases that changed laws and saved lives. And consider supporting organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Emma Richardson Foundation, which continue working to protect children and support families affected by these unimaginable tragedies. Emma Richardson was 7 years old when she died on September 11, 2001. She never got to grow up, never got to experience her 8th birthday, never got to fulfill her dream of becoming a veterinarian, but through her family's advocacy and the law that bears her name, Emma's legacy is protecting children across America. That is how we turn tragedy into purpose. That is how we ensure that children who vanish without a trace are never forgotten. And that is how we honor the memory of every missing child by fighting to make sure no other family has to endure what the Richardsons did. Thank you for watching Missing Innocence. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more emotional true crime storytelling about missing persons, unsolved cases, and the families who never stop searching for answers. Rest in peace, Emma Richardson. Your story will save lives.